All right. I just got up a little bit ago and I decided to check out this Oxford Mathematician Destroys Atheism 15-minute Brilliancy by Daily Dose of Wisdom. And it's very rhetorical and um, I don't think it's very persuasive, but I am very biased as an atheist and as somebody who has spent some time trying to evaluate the evidence for the Christian God specifically, and I don't buy it. So um, I'm going to watch this video and criticize its arguments and assumptions. And I don't think it's all that brilliant. I think it's the same kind of argumentation that all the Christian uh, apologetics use and the Christian um, intellectuals use to try to talk to uh, people who don't believe. And it's very uh, narrow, and I don't think it's very persuasive. So let's check it out here, and we'll watch some of this.
What you're about to listen to is absolutely exceptional. It's John Lennox with Oxford Union making his case for God. It's extremely dense. He packs a lot into a little amount of time. So feel free to pause, rewind, whatever you need to make sure that you're really grasping each and every idea that he lays out. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive in.
I believe in God. I
Let me fix my damn audio here.
believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth.
Um, he believes it. He's a smart guy, but he also was born into English Christian culture. So I'm not sure that he worked really hard to um, unbias himself from that upbringing and indoctrination to come at the um, Christian faith uh, from a uh, intellectual standpoint. So he's going to use rational, reasoned arguments for believing something that he was uh, uh, something he grew up with, and I'm just not sure that that would be the case if he grew up somewhere else. Like, if he grew up in a place that didn't believe in Christianity, would he have come to the conclusion that Christianity was uh, accurate as a as an explanation for everything? Otherwise, I don't know.
I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence. I believe that on the basis of rational evidence. And as we look at the rise of science in the 16th and 17th centuries, Alfred North Whitehead and many others commented that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver.
Um, Somebody said that men become scientific because of the expectation of law in nature, and because of that must have a lawgiver. This is like a retroactive uh, uh, hindsight kind of a reasoning. People have been trying to figure out what's real and what's going on, and what cause and effect looks like forever. And it's important for people to experiment, learn, and create theories of how things are. And the um, uh, modern scientific endeavor is not new. It's just more advanced. And so the idea that man was like, well, I guess I got to go look for laws in nature because there's a lawgiver, um, I don't think is a good argument for God. Um, also, um, yeah, that's good enough for now.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject. What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science. That's like asking people to choose between Henry Ford and engineering as an explanation of the motor car.
So good.
So good, yeah. I don't know that anyone's asking you to choose between God and science. I think what people are doing is trying to point out the kind of contradiction between um, the the rationale that goes into most scientific thinking that isn't being applied to Christianity, and the fact that a lot of the scientific evidence has completely refuted a ton of Christian dogma and and facts. So there's Christian, um, like I guess metaphysics, and then there's like what science has kind of pushed aside as far as how uh, biology works, how the age of the Earth, um, uh, just physics, all these things that have kind of made it so that the uh, truth of the Bible uh, is in question. And so they're like, why do you believe in this nonsense if you also believe in this other stuff that has evidence and is rational? And I don't think anybody cares if you're a Christian and a scientist. Tons and tons of people are Christians and go about their lives uh, uh, learning and using science and advancing science, and that's fine. It's Christianity doesn't have to be a limiting intellectual factor in your life. Um, but if you're going to make claims about um, biblical or Christian uh, uh, as a reality or as an explanation for certain things, then you should be able to use the same kind of scientific methodology and rigor uh, to make those arguments really solid. But that's not what people are doing. They are kind of taking two domains, the domain of faith and the domain of skeptic scientific methodology, and they're trying to say that they're compatible, but they're not. And you can have uh, spiritual, emotional belief systems and then disentangle those from your logical, intellectual brain so you can do science. You can do both, but they are not accomplishing the same things.
When Newton discovered his law of gravity, he didn't say, I've got a law, I don't need God. No, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, arguably the greatest work in the whole history of science, because he saw that God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. God doesn't compete. Agency does not compete with mechanism and law. Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan.
He said agency doesn't compete with mechanisms. So don't try to compete. Just make claims and don't do science with God. Just say science is over here, God's over here, and they're not the same. I don't need to rationalize God. I don't need to explain it away with the same kind of logic and scientific proof systems. Just say I don't need to do that. But you're trying to do that. You're saying these are all the rational arguments for God, and or arguments against atheism. But you don't need to do that. Just use faith and just accept that they're different.
SanDisk, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question. But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing, which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron. If I say X created Y, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it.
That might be worth rewinding in case you missed it the first time. That is such a good point.
Reminds
He's right. Like, nothing isn't a concept that allows for more things. But I don't think science is sitting there going around talking about nothing, creating something. There is a book called How Something Came from Nothing, and I haven't been able to get into it. I found it hard to understand and hard to grasp because I think it's trying to like play a trick with words. Is my guess, but I think he's referring to the Big Bang, and the Big Bang is not about nothing. It's about expansion and contraction of material and of space and time, and it's a solid theory, and the universe definitely is expanding, but whether it's been doing that at a constant rate forever and whether it is necessary for it to have condensed down into that very small space, it's just conjecture, and scientists are constantly able to say they're not 100% and they're not perfectly sure, and it doesn't imply that you should do anything particular with your life. So using the Big Bang as this kind of catch-all for, well, if the Big Bang is true, then there had to be a beginning to the Big Bang, and somebody created the Big Bang, and that's God, is unnecessary and wishful thinking. And then also saying that the Big Bang is a stupid concept because you can't create something from nothing is like, well, that's not really what the Big Bang is theorizing. It doesn't say that there was nothing. It just says that everything that we know as the universe is condensed into a small space, and we don't know for sure exactly what that looks like. So why don't you just not believe in the Big Bang? You can just say it's a theory that doesn't make sense, and you don't believe it, and you just believe God made it. Like, is the universe billions of years old, or is it thousands of years old? Did God make it as it is today, or did God make the Big Bang? Like, I don't get how you can have all of those things be true at the same time. If the Bible is literal, which he talks about later, he'll talk about how Jesus literally came back from the dead, and that proves Christianity, then why would the Big Bang exist? That doesn't make sense. I don't get it.
me a little bit of G.K. Chesterton, who said, "It is absurd to complain that it is unthinkable for an unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing and then to pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything. The heavens declare the glory of God, says the ancient psalm. And we've unraveled a bit of that, seeing the fine-tuning of the fundamental forces of nature. It's something that's so striking to scientists that it demands explanation. And it seems to me that Arno Penzias hit it right. He is the Nobel Prize winner who discovered the microwave background on which a lot of the evidence for the Big Bang is based. He said astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan.
This is the fine-tuning thing, but fine-tuning is a framing device. If you say everything is fine-tuned, you're literally just adding a tuner. You're adding a person who tuned things. But if you look at everything as if someone created it, then you're just presuming the creator, as opposed to just accepting that you don't know. And things are the way that they are, and we exist. If they weren't that way, we wouldn't be able to be as we are. And it's just, I guess you have to just take it for granted that in order to exist, you have to be in an environment where you can exist. But to say that that's the purpose, that someone's willed that to happen, is adding a thing that you need to then explain as well. So if God made everything fine-tuned for us and for the rest of the universe, then what fine-tuning had to exist for the God to exist? So that's just a kind of infinite regression of logic. And then also, things are fine-tuned. I don't think that's true. We also don't have any evidence that, like, creatures can't exist with other physical systems in place, other forces. We don't know that there's no alternative to the current configuration of physical elements or physical forces that wouldn't allow for life or for whatever. Also, the idea that life is the goal of the universe is super self-centered, and if it is, then why isn't there more life in the universe? It seems like we're more of an anomaly than the rule. So is it really all that fine-tuned? I just don't really dig on it's just a presumption. It's just saying we exist, and therefore there has to be a reason for it. I don't think that's very useful.
But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here. And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation. Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And Wigner talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here can come up with equations that seem to fit the universe out there? Well, how is it indeed? Because the irony of the atheist position here is evident. My atheist friends, and I have many of them, tell me that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know, ladies and gentlemen, what has often happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival. Leading philosopher Alvin Plantinga of Notre Dame says, if atheists are right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then they have given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including their atheism. Their biology and their belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God. Yet my atheist friends still insist that it is rational for them to believe that the evolution of human reason was not directed for the purpose of discovering truth. And yet it is irrational for me to believe that human reason was designed and created by God to enable us to understand and believe the truth. Curious logic.
I don't think that's that. It's like a that argument that either our brains are designed to understand the universe, and that's a thing God wants, or or we can't be we can't, or we aren't capable of understanding truths. But that's like a kind of absolutism when it comes to truth, which is what God is. It's one of the biggest problems with the concept of God is how absolute it is. Whereas almost nothing is really that absolute, especially when it comes to truth. But also the idea that evolution doesn't explain rational thinking and the ability to understand the universe better, and that evolution doesn't create a progression. Evolution is mindless as far as will goes, but it isn't random as far as survival goes. In order for things to continue to survive, they have to be capable of adapting, and adapting is not a doesn't work backwards very well. So any creatures that negatively adapt will die, and then those that positively adapt will survive longer. And so or at least long enough. And so the evolution of something like the nervous system to understand the outside world, and then to develop things like internal modeling systems like we have in creatures of a significant enough neural density in their brains, essentially like people and animals and other things. The idea that that's not explained by the need to survive is crazy. Like, math is very, very useful in surviving. And pretty much all of our endeavors, no matter how sophisticated, are still in the goal of surviving and producing more offspring. So the idea that all of rationality within our minds is there because God put it there is just saying it. It's just a claim that says we're smart, so there must be a reason for being smart. That's not naturally derived, but evolution works in that way. It works in that progressive way wherein adaptation works within a local space and environment and time. And if our rational brains were to in the future become less adaptive, then we would start dying off and having less children that are more rational. And at some point, people would become dumber if that was better for our survival. But it seems that being rational is actually really good for survival, and being able to solve problems and work together and model the future and use science, which is a inherently skeptical system that doesn't. Science isn't sitting there going, we know everything and the truth is figured out. It's the opposite of what Christians do, which is say, we know everything and we figured it out. It's just a totally different way to look at the world. And acting like science is doing the same thing as Christians, and they've come up with these solution or these ultimate answers, is just not what science is doing. Atheism isn't saying I found the alternative to God. It's just saying I don't believe in your version of what you're talking about. It's just skeptical and questioning, and it's looking for proof. And he's working on, people are trying to figure out that proof, but it's just not convincing because they're just claims. They're just self-reinforced tautologies wherein God exists because God exists because God exists because I said he exists. It's just not very good proof.
By contrast with that, biblical theism asserts that ultimate reality is personal and intelligent, and the reason science works, and this was the motivating force that drove the great pioneers of science, is that the universe out there and the human mind in here that does the science are ultimately the product of the same intelligent divine mind. Human beings are made, we are told, in God's image, and that means that science can be done. That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than atheism does.
Fine. Who gives a shit? Like, if you're like, well, it's easier to believe that we're made in God's image and that allows us to do science, that's fine. Just stop trying to justify that belief in the same rational system that you use to do the science. It's just a claim. You're just saying it feels right. It seems correct. That's fine. It's an emotional kind of reaction, and it's very likely because you were born into a system of Christianity and it works pretty well for that culture. And I just don't. I don't see that as a proof of anything.
Now let me come briefly to ethics. Ethical behavior, like rational behavior, of course, does not itself require religious belief.
Ethical behavior, like rational behavior, doesn't require religious belief. Okay, obviously those are true, but I'm not sure that ethical behavior and rational behavior are the same thing, although being ethical is rational if you want to get along with people.
This is consistent with the fact that humans are created in God's image as rational moral persons.
So you don't have to believe in it for you to be susceptible to it. That's true. If if God is the force for rationality and ethics, and it is an immutable law that those things are enforced by God, then you wouldn't have to believe in it, just like you don't have to believe in gravity for gravity to weigh you down.
But just as I suggest that rationality cannot be explained without the existence of God, so I dare to suggest that the existence...
Rationality exists definitely without... Aren't birds rational? But I guess God would want them to be? I don't know. Anyway, like when they do their little logic puzzles, or not, I don't know if they're more like physics puzzles, but to me that's a type of rationality. Anyway.
Of morality cannot be explained either. As modern science sprang from Judeo-Christian sources, so did the concept of human equality. Listen to atheist Jürgen Habermas, arguably one of Germany's leading intellectuals. He said that universalistic egalitarianism, from which sprang the ideals of freedom and a collective life and solidarity, the individual morality of conscience, human rights and democracy, is the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. This legacy, substantially unchanged, has been the object of continual critical appropriation and reinterpretation. To this day, there's no alternative to it. Everything else is just idle postmodern talk.
This is the argument from the moral superiority of Christianity, and he goes to talk about Judeo-Christian, but Judaism and Christianity and Islam all have their own little differentiations and different rules and different ethics and different morality. So it's not really clear which one is the one I should be following. Also, I don't believe that the ethics and morality that's portrayed in the Bible, or that's actually enacted on people and in society, hasn't changed. It's changed tremendously. Like our moral systems and our justice systems evolve over time and change and adapt, and we're constantly negotiating how these things should be enforced. And I think that the modern democratic state, which one of the big tenets, at least in America, is the separation of church and state. So I wonder if that has anything to do with some of the ability for the first world countries such as America and England, which has departed itself, from Christianity in tons of ways as far as the politics goes. Also, they have a monarchy, which is just fucking weird. But the idea that it all comes from God's will, that we all we all can vote and we all can be equal, is just, why wasn't that the case in Bible times, or in 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 100 years ago? People were not doing so well, and they weren't equal, and they still aren't equal, really. If you look at how politicians get away with tons and tons of stuff, why doesn't God step in and make everyone equal? It's just like this kind of like trying to make it seem like Christianity has this like beautiful moral system. I don't really get it. I don't really like. Did you read the Bible? Do you read the things that happen in the Bible? Do you read how people use the Bible? Like, what about all those Westboro Baptist people who hate gay people? And that's all. They get it from the Bible. Maybe they're wrong. I mean, I think they're wrong, and obviously they're hateful and they're not helpful, and they are a big waste of time. But they're justifying their beliefs based on the same thing you are. I don't get why they're wrong and you're not.
And it seems to me he's hitting the core of something important, because the value of a human being on which such egalitarianism rests is based not on what the human being can do, but what she's made of, or how she's made in God's image.
She's so valuable because she's made in God's image, but she wasn't treated that way for fucking a long time. So what are you talking about? Who's enforcing these new moral codes other than people who have changed, like society and our negotiations and our ability to create different environments changes the way that we need to interact with each other. It allows for more freedoms, and I don't know why we don't. Whatever.
I never forget speaking on one of my many visits to Russia to a colleague in the Academy of Sciences. And he said, you know, John, we thought we could abolish God and retain a value for human beings. We found we couldn't. And we murdered millions of them. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn has said, if I'm asked, why is it that 60 million of my fellow countrymen were sacrificed? He said, the answer is, we have forgotten God.
I think it is a problem when a society disregards its value systems. And I do think that in place of God, which is a way of controlling large groups of people via these dictums, or these rules, and then you take away this justification for these rules, and then you create these new rules. There's huge upheaval and chaos, and that's not good. But the idea that Russia was basing everything solely on the knowledge of a lack of God, or the refusal to be Christian, and that led them to kill everybody, is ridiculous. Not believing in something doesn't inform new actions, at least not in this case. So I guess, yeah, it's like it doesn't make sense. So politics and power and control and dictatorships and governments, they have goals and expectations and are run by emotionally affected people. And they also might use rationalities to try to accomplish these goals, and their denial of God isn't the reason that they killed a bunch of people. But I do think that but I mean, God justified killing a bunch of people too, so I don't even think that's a good argument. It's just like people in power utilize different excuses to do bad things. Some of them use God, and some of them use some type of either emotional or rational justification. So they wanted to create equality among everyone, but because they saw that some people were better than other people at farming or at being smart, they thought that that was against this expectation or this goal of making everyone equal, and they wanted to redistribute resources and abilities, and that's a problem. That type of gerrymandering and control over human activities causes all sorts of problems. And lots of people died because of famine, because they told farmers not to farm, and they wanted all the money. It wasn't valuable for the farmers anymore, and they couldn't live off of it or whatever, and people died. And then in other countries there's genocides, like Mao was wasn't a Christian, but there's no reason that if he was a Christian he wouldn't have done those things. Also, Hitler was Catholic and had great ties with the church. So I just don't. It's not proof of God that bad things happen and powerful people are assholes.
Science, of course, marvelous as it is limited. Even a Nobel Prize winner, by analyzing a cake, cannot tell why it was made. But Aunt Matilda, who made it, can tell you.
what? Who gives a fuck about cakes? Also, you can tell why a cake is made because we have context and we don't live outside of context. And a cake that isn't poisoned is probably made to be eaten. Um, anyway,
She can reveal it to you. But if she doesn't reveal it to you, you'll never know. And that brings me to be
that's so stupid. What do you, that's what? A cake? A scientist can look at a cake. First of all, a scientist could definitely look at a cake and, like, figure out what chemicals are in it and what it's made of. They can describe it, what it looks like, and they can go into how cakes are made in a book and understand how ingredients get combined to make a cake. Science isn't limited to this kind of uh, looking at the molecules of something and being like, "Well, I don't know what it is because I can't see the bigger picture." It's stupid.
my next evidence. It's the same with the universe. We can analyze it magnificently, but ultimately, if it has a maker, and I believe it has, only he can tell us what it's all about. And he's done so in the powerful narrative of the Bible, in particular in its analysis of the problem with humanity, not simply in terms of behavioral breakdown between people, but a vertical breakdown of trust between us and the Creator. The unique solution to that problem is not simply in terms of human ethical development, although that's very important, but in terms of something far deeper altogether. The restoration of the fractured relationship with God through the salvation he has brought through Jesus Christ. A radical relationship that empowers us to live ethically from God. And here we reach what for me is the chief evidence, not only for the existence, but the nature of God. It is Jesus Christ. He it was who not only taught the golden rule, but embodied it, fed the hungry, healed the sick and suffering, and welcomed society's outcasts, brought honor and respect to the marginalized and ashamed. And he's brought forgiveness and peace to multi-millions around the world. He's able to do this, of course, because though he was a man, he uniquely never was only a man, but God become human.
Appealing to Jesus as if you believe in Jesus, that's a great reason to, like, believe in God. Like, if you believe all that, but it's not good argumentation to try to convince someone who doesn't believe in Jesus. Like, if you don't believe in Jesus, somebody just saying, "Well, just believe in Jesus," is not very good fucking persuasive argumentation or rhetoric or whatever. It's just a claim, and it's a really ridiculous claim, especially because of he is essentially a supernatural magician who can do miraculous things and was super good, but also, kind of a rebel and blah blah blah. And then there's the the lack of clarity around Jesus's existence, and even those who believe that Jesus was a historical person, a real living person that had effects on the world, which I'm skeptical of. But I'm skeptical of generally all historical accounts. I just think that there's a great deal of room for manipulation and fabrication in our telling of the past. Even our telling of the current situation is fraught with biases, lies, and exaggerations, and self-serving motives. But even if Jesus did exist, um, and had an impact and created a following, that doesn't mean that he is the son of God or he created miracles. Just because he's a cool guy doesn't mean he's fucking God's actual child. Um, I think um, that's again just sort of this uh, uh, tautological argument where just you have to believe in the presupposition in something in order to create those logical leaps. And that's the problem, is I don't believe in the initial premise of Jesus being the actual Son of God. Whatever.
The central evidence for this startling claim is, of course, his historical resurrection from the dead that launched Christianity in the world.
See, he says historical resurrection from the dead. He's framing it as if it's established historical fact. It isn't. It's not just debated. It's impossible to actually know what actually happened, however long ago that was. What, 2,000 years ago? Was that 2,000 years ago? It's like, what are you talking about? In these barely literate and fictionalized stories from barely illiterate people who talked. They. Ugh, I don't even think the printing press existed back then. I mean, obviously it didn't, but they were just writing things down and mostly just telling stories. And if that's the case, you should put tons of weight on the stories that Native Americans tell of all the gods in the forest. Like, those were just stories. But he just frames it like it's historical fact that Jesus resurrected. Like, you believe that. That's your thing, and it's not scientific, and it isn't. And it would be exceptionally easy for God to do it again. He could have done it every year. He could have killed Jesus every year for 2,000 years, and every year, 3 days later, he came back, and it became this very obvious event, and we studied it, and we go, it's a fucking miracle. God exists. No, that's not the case. Anyway.
This is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a crunch issue. If Jesus rose from the dead, death is not the end, and atheism is false. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, Christianity is false. And I remember at Cambridge as a student listening.
Christianity doesn't have to be false because of this one thing. Although if that's not the case, then that particular aspect of Christianity is false, and people would have to disregard it. But the idea that if it is true, then it's proof that there's a life after death is just assuming that God didn't give Jesus a special case. Like, the life after death thing is one of the least proved things ever. And just saying that this one guy died and then came back doesn't mean that there's life after death, other than in that one situation, that one case. But because he's God's son, why isn't that just for him? Why isn't that when I die, I just die? Also, life after death doesn't mean coming back to the normal world. In most cases, that's not the idea. So,
to the brilliant Sir Norman Anderson, a legal expert, going through forensically the evidence from his legal perspective as a brilliant lawyer. And he said at the end of it, the empty tomb then of Jesus forms a veritable rock on which all rationalistic theories of the resurrection dash themselves in vain. Just finally now, as I read the Bible, I do not only find intellectual satisfaction, but I find a great deal of that. I sense the voice of God speaking to me. You say that's intensely personal. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked tonight about belief in God. And I want to strongly emphasize that God is not a theory, he's a person. And if the origination of me qua person is a personal God, then the most exciting thing really is there a possibility of getting to know God? And so I don't simply believe there is a God. I've come to know him and trust him. And I have strong reasons for doing so, because of Christ dying and rising again for me. And that has generated in me a sense of utterly unmerited forgiveness, acceptance, and peace that has enabled me to face the ugly side of my own nature and with God's help to do something about it. But it's enabled me to face something else. The hardest problem I face as a Christian is the problem of evil and pain. My niece getting a tumor at 22 that kills her? What do I say to my sister? And this is the hardest problem we face. But it seems to me that atheism here has no answer, because by definition, atheism believes that human death is the end, so there is no ultimate hope. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay here till midnight and beyond arguing, as has been done in this university for centuries, what a good God should, might, would, could, if not, possibly might, just could he not have done, and we'll get nowhere. So it seems to me there's another question we can ask, and it's this. Granted that life presents us with a double picture. We see some beautiful things. We see some ragged edges. We see hurt and pain, and we see joy. How can we come to terms with that? And it seems to me here is no simplistic answer, but a window into an answer, and it's this. If it is actually true that Jesus is, as I believe him to be, the Son of God, then we can ask the question, what is God doing on a cross? And the answer comes back at the very least. God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it. And the other side of that is this. Because Jesus rose from the dead, he is going to be the ultimate judge. Now here's an irony, because atheism has no ultimate hope of justice by definition. The vast majority of people in the history of the world have died without justice and will die without justice. And if death is the end, then of course they have no hope of ultimate justice. But the promise in the New Testament, guaranteed by the resurrection of Jesus, is that he is to be the judge in the coming day. So, ladies and gentlemen,
that last little bit was just the example of wishful thinking that comes from this type of belief system. I can't wrap my head around why there's evil in the world and God could do things, because the Christian God specifically is all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing. And those are completely ridiculous claims. He sees everything. He's watching you. He's judging you. He's, double checking if you're going to go to heaven or hell. He steps in, certain times, but not other times. He sent Jesus in like a little warrior, go down there, make a fucking kerfuffle, and then die because you're a sacrifice, and then come back. Don't worry, it'll be fine. All of that is just you believing the story. That's you taking a fiction and then applying it to the real world and saying that that's how you want to view things. And that's all just trust that the Bible and the interpretation of the Bible that you're using is good enough to base your life on. And I'm skeptical. I'm just a little bit skeptical of how it's good and how it makes sense and how it's not just wishful thinking. And he talks about Jesus being the ultimate judge because he can, because he died and he can come back, and God doesn't just let us suffer. He came down and suffered himself. So fucking what? That's not good. That's not. So you create a bunch of humans, you give them the ability to suffer, you make them suffer, and instead of taking the suffering away, you just kind of suffer a little bit with them. That's the goodness. That's the great and powerful fucking God. It's just stupid. I don't get it. Like, although atheism doesn't need to create some ultimate justice or ultimate hope. What the fuck are you talking about? You're not entitled to ultimate justice and ultimate hope. And if if Christianity is true and you either go to heaven or hell, then hell is a fucking problem. So I don't know about this hope situation. Now, if you're Jewish and you don't believe in hell, um, then or you're a Christian and you don't believe in hell, then we all just go to heaven anyway. So that's fine. Whatever, not very powerful. Um, and if you're a Buddhist or whatever, then you believe in reincarnation. And so there's some hope there, potentially, or there's suffering forever. Like that's great. But if you're just skeptical scientist and you just say, um, I don't know, but all the evidence seems to show that people when they die they just die and they get their um, materials just get reabsorbed into the world and those get recycled um, and you just have a finite amount of time and your suffering will end and your happiness will end and that's what there's evidence for. So live your life, in a way that takes all that into account, and you can do whatever you feel like maximizes that endeavor. But uh, the idea that there's this ultimate justice and bad guys will get it and people who suffered will get their justice in the future, that's just hopeful thinking. It's just you saying it, it's wishing it, wanting it, hoping for it, and prove that there is ultimate justice and that it's not from an asshole.
Those are some of the reasons why
Reasons.
I believe that God
Believe.
is real and worthy to be trusted. Thank you.
To
When
be
Christians talk
trusted.
about God, it is personal. It's not fantasy.
If it's personal, then stop trying to fucking use science and rationale and to justify it. Just say, I like it. It's my thing. I want to believe in it. Shut the fuck up. It's faith. Ugh. If it's so personal, leave me alone about it. Why are there people trying to convince people and making people go to church and judging people and ostracizing people? It's just a personal God. It doesn't matter so much. Shut the fuck up.
It's not the spaghetti monster in the sky. There is a reality of God
It's not the spaghetti. It is the spaghetti monster in the sky. It's just the spaghetti and the monster in the sky that you think it is.
when you have accepted him on his terms. That is completely undeniable. It is as undeniable as my relationship with my wife in the other room. If you were to tell me that she's not real, I would laugh at you in the same way that if you were to tell me that God is not real. But that type of knowing is not accessible.
Having your knowledge of your wife is not the same as your knowledge of a completely invisible concept. Ugh, I don't. And your knowledge of your wife on its own isn't enough proof for me to believe your wife exists, right? I haven't seen her. I don't know that she really exists. But in this uh, ability uh, to seek out evidence, we can be a little bit more sure that things really exist. And the evidence for God is not the same as the evidence for your wife. Your wife can be seen and interacted with by other people, and people are delusional sometimes. And some people don't have a wife, and they think they have a wife. Anyway.
To someone who hasn't met God on his terms. There's this conceit and this arrogance that actually gets directly in the way of the knowing of God and the relationship of God. And so I just love what Linux says here, because he starts with sort of unpacking like, why is scientism, the philosophy of science as the only epistemology, why is that reductionistic? Then he walks into human rights, into morality, and ultimately down to the extremely personal level, which is where all of these conversations must end. So all this being said, I hope that someone listening to this, if anyone is still listening to this, appreciated that as much as I did, because I think that it's a mistake to break apart these pieces and to only talk about this, to only talk about this. A lot of my videos focus on like the moral case for God, but really it is like this tapestry where all of these threads are connected together in this, this Christian worldview. And it's when the threads are working together and you can see the whole. I think Linux does a phenomenal job in this of beginning to reveal that picture of reality. All that being said,
Um, I watch a bunch of this guy's videos because they're not his videos, actually. He sits in the corner and lets people talk and uses their videos. Kind of like what I'm doing, but I'm trying to like stop the whole thing and add my own little parts, whereas he just sort of lets it go forever. And a lot of his videos, he doesn't really talk a lot. I think it's kind of interesting that that's like a whole, like it's he wants to get the information out there, and instead of just pointing people to them, he's just showing you someone else's material. And I just want to uh, I mean, I don't know that that's bad, but I don't want to just sit there with you watching a lecture. I want to interact with the lecture. I want to, like, if I was in person with a lecturer and I had the opportunity to ask questions, I'd want to be able to ask questions, and it'd be fun to argue with somebody. So I guess this is just like a way of me voyeuristically arguing with these other people. Because I don't have the opportunity to do it with them in person, and these events have already occurred and all that. So when I watch these debates, or when I listen to people talk about things that are not super uh, agreed upon, I have opinions, and I think it's fun. But I don't believe in God, and I don't think that was very useful. And if the whole thing just boils down to you just have a personal relationship, who gives a fuck? Like, good for you. I have a personal relationship with my fucking PS5. I spend a lot of time playing it, and it brings joy to my life. Allows me to connect to other people. We can have, conversations about things, um, uh, and it's super real to me, and I wouldn't appreciate somebody taking it away. But at least my PS5 exists, isn't just in my mind. Although it's okay if it's just in your mind. That's fine. I don't need to change all the stuff about your mind. But it's the implications and expectations that happen within religion that become an issue, and its influence on behavior and politics that's the issue. It's not just your little personal fucking feelings. So, all right, that'll do it. Thank you. Adios.